This happened a few months ago. A new guy joined my boarding school. He was this skinny dude that, even though he seemed a little bit off, he was extremely nice. We immediately hit it off quite well since we had pretty similar music tastes. He was a little bit weird, but overall a very charming, normal dude. He wouldn't get along with most people though, so I felt some sort of responsibility to make him feel welcome and at home. I would help him out with cigarettes when he needed any, and generally I would be very kind to him. One time I arranged the meet-up with him and with my girl outside of my boarding room school since we would get the weekend off, and we met in the central city of where I lived and decided to go get some drinks and sit at a park. It was getting late and conversation was flowing and everyone was having fun. He kept being sort of weird, but his fun self until, well, he snapped. I knew for a fact that he wasn't inebriated since we had only been drinking beers and he only had one. He suddenly just had this crazy look and he kept holding on to my girl really hard. I could see that she was starting to panic, so I just pushed him off. He calmed down for a second and then picked up something from the floor and tried to shove it into her mouth. At that point, I charged at him full speed and threw him to the ground. I held my fist up and he immediately started to apologize, but he would only say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over again. Once I got up, he immediately tried charging towards her as if I didn't just tackle him down. I stopped him before he could touch her and threw him on the ground again. I gave him a few punches but stopped. Something about his expression really scared me. He had this look, like he wasn't even there. It was like he had one goal, which I didn't want to find out. I put him in a headlock and got him far away from my girl and where we were sitting. I then pushed him as hard as I could and went to get my girl and leave. He kept trying to follow us for a while until I went up to him, and he still had this weird, hollow look on his face. I tried getting him to leave until finally I told him, "Look, man, we forgot something back in the park. Can you go get it for us?" Somehow that dumb idea worked. He started walking back, and the second he was out of sight, me and my girl made a run for it and took the first bus home. This happened a while back. I was probably around 10 to 11 years old, meaning my brother, we'll call him Alex, was around 8 to 9 years old. We were walking home from the bus, which takes about 7 minutes to do, when I noticed something was off. I didn't see anything at first, but I just knew that something was wrong. So my brother and I start walking home, as the only two who got off at our stop were him and I. This blue and silver beat-up truck drives past us, and I think nothing of it. It never slowed down or stopped, it just kept going. Alex and I were holding hands, as my grandmother always told me to do with him, as he's my baby brother and I want nothing to happen to him. Nothing happens at first, but then the same truck drives around again, driving our way this time. There was a cul-de-sac at the end of our road. He was driving slower this time and went up the road and turned out of sight. Now Alex and I were nearing the three-way intersection that connected the cul-de-sac road to the other side's road, right off the main road the man had just drove down. I happened to look down the street and see the truck driving real slow down the street towards us again. I knew we had to run. I knew there was no other option. I knew that if we didn't, my brother and I would not be safe. Call it a gut feeling. I don't know how I knew, but I did, and as soon as we passed a house that blocked us from the view, I turned to Alex and spoke to him exactly 4 words. No questions. Just run. And we did. In our driveway, which is about 100 feet long, there's a row of bushes and pine trees that divide our home from the next-door neighbor. I dragged him in there and told him to be quiet and that I'd explain later. I watched as the same truck drove down and around the cul-de-sac again before coming to a stop right in front of our house. I had to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was crying, and I was scared that whoever was following us would hear him and hurt us. I was more worried for him than for myself at this point. I was in fight-or-flight mode. I was the big sister, and I had to protect him. I looked at him and said that the truck was following us, and I told him not to be scared. I said I wouldn't let anyone hurt him, and it seemed to calm him down a little. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the door to the truck opened and out came a man. He was tall, skinny, and messy, short hair covered by a torn baseball cap, ripped jean shorts, and a puke green tank top. He entered our yard and looked around a bit. Alex and I were still in the bushes, and I was trying to find a way to get to our house safely without getting this dude's attention. The guy left after what felt like forever and entered his car. He started it and drove away slowly. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was gone before turning to my brother and saying, "We need to run. When I count to 3, we're going to run behind the house to the back door, okay?" He agreed, and we waited a few more seconds before I started counting. I still didn't have a good feeling about this, but I knew that we had to move. I started counting, and as soon as I hit 3, we booked it across our driveway into our front yard to go around the house. As soon as we left our spot, I heard it, the sound of accelerating. He saw us. He was waiting for us to leave. He chased us up our driveway as soon as we ran around the side. I grabbed Alex's hand and practically dragged him around the house and made him run ahead to the garage door to see if it was locked while I searched for my house key. The garage door was open. I swear to God I saw this man round the opposite corner of the house that we did as I entered the house. We entered and I slammed it shut, locking it and deadbolting it. I didn't stop running until I opened the house door and ran downstairs with Alex screaming our safe word. My grandmother made a safe word for us that was a normal everyday word that we could use if we were in danger, just had to scream it basically. It woke my aunt who worked the night shift and was sleeping. We told her everything and she stayed up with us until my grandmother got home. We called the police and that was my first ever interaction with an officer. Unfortunately, the man was never caught. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I'm sure it definitely was not good. I'm just glad my grandma drilled stranger danger into my head. I don't know where my brother or I would be right now if she hadn't. This happened when I was around 12 years old. It was in the middle of the night at my house. My dad would work the graveyard shift at his work. Since it was the weekend, I had stayed up most of the night. It was somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m., and my dad had told me to lock the doors and to go to sleep, which I did. I went to my room and finally went to sleep, but only for about an hour. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking on my back door. It scared me awake. After taking a few moments to process what I heard, I decided it was probably just my dad knocking on the door. Maybe he just forgot something. Me being really exhausted, I knew he had a house key on him, so I just told myself he had unlocked the door himself. But the knocking continued. It was pretty creepy. Then the next thing I knew, the knocking stopped. And then it started again, but at a different location. Someone was knocking on the window in my kitchen. I continued to assure myself it was my father. I didn't understand why he couldn't just unlock the door himself. He always had a key on him. I felt pretty freaked out, so I wasn't answering the door. If anything, my dad would call me to open the door on my phone, which was next to me. The knocking started again at another window, and I was terrified now, too scared to get up and check who was out there. The knocking wasn't stopping, and the next thing I know, the knocking moved to my front door at a harsher level, too. That's when it hit me that I couldn't move. I was actually frozen in fear. I couldn't scream or talk or move any muscle. My heart was dropping as the knocking moved to another window closer and closer to my bedroom window where my curtains were see-through. I still could not move. I didn't know what to do or say. I could only stare out as my fear consumed me. I moved my eyes over to the window and my heart stopped when I saw a man peering through my window. A tall man with a dark ski mask. I could hardly make out the details because it was so dark, but I think his mask had some sort of skeleton design on it. He tilted his head slightly. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I closed my eyes hard and started telling myself, "It's not real, it's not real," over and over. I opened my eyes and there was no one there. I sighed a sense of relief until I heard a loud whisper tell me, "I'll cut you out." Everything suddenly stopped. I could finally move again not long after, and I really couldn't sleep anymore that night. It definitely didn't feel like a dream. I've never experienced sleep paralysis before, and everything felt so real. I don't know what happened, but I pray I'll never have to experience that again. It was one of the most frightening moments in my life that I've ever dealt with, and I do think it was real. I was home alone that day, so nobody could back me up, but the following morning I asked my dad when he came back from work if he came back earlier that day and knocked on my doors and windows. He didn't. So this happened to me almost 7 years ago. I should give some background info before getting into things. At the time this all happened, I was around 16 years old and I had a friend I'll call Karen, who was dating a boy named John. At this point in time, Karen and John had been dating for maybe 6 months, and after going out with Karen and John on many occasions, they decided that they wanted to hook me up with John's friend, who we'll call Cameron. At this point in time, I had met Cameron in person once. He was nice, so I gave him my social media and we chatted a couple of times. It's important to note that he didn't have my number or know where I live. Fast forward to one night, maybe a week or two after I met Cameron. I'm laying in bed. It's about 2 or 3 in the morning and I get a call from an unknown number. Thinking, why is an unknown number calling me at this time of night? I decided to answer it and see who it is. So I answer the phone and say hi, and a man responds saying hi back. Since I didn't recognize the voice on the other end, I asked the person who they are. Instead of giving me an answer to this question, the man on the line tells me to look outside my window. Thinking this is probably a prank call, I tell the man to F off and hang up the phone. Once I did this, the number calls back again. Didn't answer it. The person then proceeds to call me another 4 times until I finally answer the phone, which again I ask who the heck is calling. This time the person responds and tells me that one of my friends gave him my number and that I'm the guy he's been talking to. At this point, my stupid 16-year-old mind is trying to rationalize this, and the only person I can think of is Cameron. Before I can say anything to this person, he again tells me to look out the window and that he's outside, and I begin hearing noises outside my window. Now, I should mention that my room is right beside my parents' room, and being stupid, my first thought was that this fool was going to wake them up, and I'd never hear the end of it. Let me tell you, that thought soon turned into the last thing I would worry about that night. Anyway, at this point, I'm also starting to get creeped out. I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this is Cameron, and Karen did give him my number, how would he know where I live? So I reply to the man and say, "Cameron? ? The man says yes, and tells me to look out my window. I reply telling him to go home and hang up the phone again. Weirded out, I decide I'm going to get up and go into my basement and call Karen so that hopefully my parents don't hear me talking from my room. This is really important because to get into my basement, I have to pass a door that is partially made of glass. So I get downstairs and call Karen. She answers, clearly half asleep. I tell Karen about the unknown call, which I'm assuming is from Cameron, and how he is telling me to look out my window because he's outside, and on top of this, that I can hear someone out there. Karen, now clearly awake, tells me that she has never given Cameron my number or address, and calls John quickly from her phone to see if maybe he did. At this point, John answers and tells Karen that not only had he never given out my information, he's with Cameron. And they tell me if someone's outside, I need to hang up and call the police immediately. So I hang up the phone, and before I can even go to dial for anyone, I get another call. Guess who? The unknown number. So I stupidly answer again, and before I get a word in, the man tells me that he knows him in the basement, and he saw me walking by my back door. Now I'm clearly disturbed, as I did just walk by my back door to get downstairs, so I know someone is outside. Again, before I could say anything, the man tells me to come outside. So stupidly, I tell the person I'm calling the police and hang up the phone. Why I didn't call the police at this point, I really don't know. Probably because I was 16, stupid, and literally in panic mode. Not more than a minute later, I get another call, an unknown number. I answer again. The man then tells me to come outside or he's coming inside to get me. Clearly panicking at this point, I have this deep gut feeling that if I go outside, I'm never coming back. However, I do have to go by the door again to get back upstairs, and that was equally terrifying to me. So I hang up the phone again and muster up the courage to run upstairs because the last place I wanted to be was in a part of my house no one else was in. I get more calls. Unknown number, unknown number, unknown number. Again, my 16-year-old stupidity answers. This time, the voice on the phone sounds shook and says to me that police stopped him outside my house and want to speak to me to make sure I know him. The phone then gets passed off to someone who identifies themselves by name with some title I no longer remember and asks if I know the man outside my address. He says my house number and street. I quickly tell the voice on the phone I have no idea who the person calling me is and hang up the phone. Never got another call again. However, I did sit there all night holding a bat and had problems sleeping for months. I should also mention I didn't have very many friends at this point in my life, and looking back on this night, I thought maybe this was a prank taken too far. However, I begged the few friends I did have for months to admit that one of them was the person who pulled this off, and to this day, they all insist none of them did it. I lived in an apartment complex right next to a 7-Eleven, literally a 2-minute walk from my door. Since all this lockdown mess, I've been staying up later than usual, till maybe about 2 or 3 a.m. most nights. So, last night a little bit after 12, I had a taste for some chips and decided I'll just go across the street to 7-Eleven, which I go to regularly. I make my way over, and on my way in, I had to pass this man who was browsing the Red Box kiosk. I don't think much of it. I go inside, get some snacks, pay, head out the door. As I'm coming out, the Red Box man is literally staring dead at me with these scarily bright, light blue eyes, but not wanting to freak myself out even more, I say to myself, maybe he's zoned out and in deep in thought. I wandered into La La Land myself sometimes, so by thinking that, I was trying to make myself more comfortable having to walk past this strange man. So I'm headed back into my apartment complex, which is on this side of the street. Has a creaky gate door. I realize as I'm walking I have never heard it slam behind me like I always have before. I look back and this man is right behind me. Not close up to me, but still definitely following. Once again, trying to ease my mind, I'm thinking he must be going home, but I also noticed he didn't have any disc in his hand for as much as he was at the kiosk the whole time I was in the store, taking my sweet, indecisive time. So not wanting to come off as scared, I keep my same pace, but I probably should have sprinted because forget being nice. Anyways, I'm literally just a few steps from my door, which is upstairs, and the man randomly calls out to me, "Hey, do you have a light, stranger?" Out of instinct, I turned my head to the fact I knew someone was speaking to me and responded, "No, I don't. Sorry." I didn't want to go up my stairs because I didn't want to let this man know exactly which apartment I lived in, so I was planning on walking around until I lost him, but he asked me another question. "Could I use your bathroom?" I tell him, no, sorry, my roommates probably wouldn't be comfortable with me letting someone in this late." I don't have roommates, but I sure didn't want this man getting any ideas thinking I was by myself. I keep walking, but this man was still following me. I simply ask, "Do you live around here?" And he tells me, "I got a buddy that does, and he was supposed to meet me across the way there, but maybe he fell asleep. I've never been here before, but I do know his door is number 201. Could you help me find it?" 201 is my door. And if you have a friend that lives over here, why are you asking to use my bathroom? I knew this man was lying and up to something. I quickly came up with, 201. Well, that should be right past the pool, right next to the laundry area. My friends are waiting for me, so I should get going. My gut told me to head to my car, though, because what if he watched where I was going and decides to give me a surprise later on? No. I've watched too many movies and read too many stories uploaded on here. So I started heading towards the parking lot, not running, but definitely walking quicker than before when I realized the man is chasing me at this point. I hurry up and pull my keys out of my pocket and get in my car and immediately lock the doors. The man starts pounding on my driver window, telling me to open the door. I can't help but focus on those creepy blue eyes, but I also noticed he was reaching for his pocket. I start up my car before I can see what he's pulling out. I heard a pop, but I didn't care in that moment, as long as I could get out of his presence. I drove maybe 5 minutes down the street to this Arco gas station and called the police. Waiting on the police to arrive, I noticed what the popping sound was. The wacko popped my back tire with probably a switchblade. Of course, when the police arrived and went to check the area, this monster was gone. They did question the 7-Eleven clerk, and he let them know that the man has been up there for a few times since last week and never has been a problem but is obviously homeless. I'm still shook up about what went on last night, and I'm gonna chill on the late-night trips to 7-Eleven for a while. When I was 17, I started working at my local grocery store. About 3 weeks in, I got transferred from the front end at baggers and cashiers to produce. My first week in produce, I met all the people in my department and all was going well. One night on my second week in produce, I was closing alone when this girl comes in. My back turned to her, I hear, "You're new, when did you start?" I turned around and we started to have a conversation while I put the last few things from my cart on the shelf. I had about 10 minutes left on my shift and was trying to go downstairs to crush my boxes, but this girl continued to talk and took no social cues that I was trying to leave. I finally get tired of listening to her talk and start to pull my cart through the produce section as she slowly follows, still talking. Eventually we get to the doors, employees only, and I start to make my way through and she comes in right after me. I explain that unfortunately she can't come this way and she needs to just go check out as our store was closing soon. She says bye and leaves, and I thought that was odd, but maybe she's just a bit weird. Crush my boxes, go home, and don't think about it. 2 days later, I'm closing again, and the same thing happens. This time she asks for my phone number. I explain that I don't have a phone at this time, hence why I had a job so I could get one. "Okay, well, would you want to hang out when you get off?" I felt kind of bad at this point, as I thought she was just a bit odd and just looking for friends. I tell her maybe next time, as my mom was picking me up. So every night I worked, she would come in and just pick up one grapefruit and then walk around, basically acting like she was either on the phone or pretending to shop and then casually stop by me. It got old really quick, to the point where I would hide in the hallway and watch her till she left. Eventually other people in the store heard about her and rumors went around that she was stalking me. The deli manager explained that she and her boyfriend, he also worked in the deli, also had been stalked by her for a number of months. Eventually she stopped coming by at night, as I was always hiding when she did come. A few weeks go by and I had just gotten off of work, early shift for a change, and my friends were meeting up at work to hang out after 2 guys and 1 girl, so I head out to the parking lot and meet up with them when my stalker comes out of nowhere and hugs me. "I haven't seen you at work in so long." "Oh, yeah, they switched my hours and now I don't work late anymore, you know." Well, one thing leads to another, and my friend, a female, starts to talk to her and basically invites her to hang out with us. She jumps on the opportunity after I explained to my friend that she was stalking me, and so we all start walking back to my friend's house to hang in the backyard, as it was a nice summer's night. The night wasn't bad. We all just hung out and I kind of avoided the stalker while my friend, a female, kept her entertained. The night came on pretty fast, and eventually it was 1 a.m. and my friend's mom came out and told us that we had to leave. Me and my 2 male friends and Stalker head out, and we're waiting at the bus stop that my friend needed to catch when Stalker explains that she can't go home this late and that she needed to stay over. So I beg my other friend to stay with me, which she agrees. We wait for the bus to pick up my other friend and head to my house. Things got super weird at this point. Basically, the Stalker refused to sleep on the floor and only wanted to sleep in the bed with me. I eventually gave up and said okay while my friend slept on the floor, so I'm lying in bed and this girl stands up and just takes her bra and shirt off and then her pants and gets in bed with me. I at first was pretty dumbfounded and didn't know what to do, so I acted like I didn't notice, and then she started trying to kiss me and have me touch her. At this point I realized this girl had serious issues. I don't know if they were mental or just social, but I didn't want to find out. I lightly pushed her off of me and explained I'm trying to sleep, and she wouldn't take the hint and kept insisting that we cuddle. I was getting fed up, and so eventually I wake my friend up, pretty sure he wasn't asleep at this point. "Nathan, you asleep?" He sits up. "No, why?" So he covers up in blankets so he doesn't see her in the buff, and then I basically explained that I wanted to go for a walk, and so I have Nathan leave the room and get her dressed so we can go for a walk. On our way out, I tell Nathan to get his bike. We walk outside at this point. It's almost 3:30 a.m., me and Nathan walking with our bikes and the girl beside us. I'm thinking of ways we can get rid of this girl. At first, I suggest me and Nathan just take a walk in the alley and go pee, but she says she's scared and wants to go with us. Eventually, while walking and talking, she says how she was on track in high school. "Oh, you run track? I bet that you can't beat us to the end of the block." At this point, Nathan looks at me and smirks as he knows we're about to ditch this girl. For it to be 3:30 a.m., this girl was excited as all get out to go sprinting. She takes off running for the end of the block, and we take off in the opposite direction back towards my house. We rush back inside and hide our bikes in my house instead of the porch and go to the living room, making sure to not turn on any lights. We sit in the living room talking about how crazy this chick is when she starts banging on the door. We stayed quiet for what seemed like 2 or 3 hours of her just banging on the door, talking to herself, banging on the door, then talking to herself. Eventually, we heard the downstairs door open, and we watched her leave. I lived on the 2nd floor of an apartment building, and my mom was out of town. So, the next few days I go to work and I don't see her, which is good. Then about a week later she comes in and she completely ignores me. She gets a random grapefruit and pretends to shop while me and a coworker are talking. She's wearing a backpack this time, and she walks right in between me and my coworker, and we're maybe 6 feet apart. She turns to walk away, and her backpack touches something on my flat cart. She turns around and starts screaming and throwing all of the boxes off my cart. A bunch of juices, some tomatoes, and a few other things I don't recall. She starts saying I grabbed her and that she wanted to talk to a manager, and so my coworker, an older guy in his 40s, tells me to go downstairs and just get away from the situation. I head downstairs and sit in the break room. About 10 minutes later, I'm called up to the hallway where my store manager is talking to the girl. I see from the door that she leaves and he comes in the hallway to talk to me. "So this girl says you grabbed her and shoved her and that you were swearing at her?" I explain what happened to my manager, and he goes and finds my coworker and then comes back to me after talking to my coworker. My manager comes in and looks at me. "You need to go sleep with her already." We kind of chuckle, and then he tells me not to worry about it and that she's probably just insane. Eventually, she left me alone, but then my girlfriend started working with me, and the girl would come in and see me and my girlfriend and then go to her line to check out. The girlfriend was a cashier and was always really rude to her. Eventually, she stopped coming around altogether, and from the looks of it, she's married to some 50-year-old man on Facebook. She's 24. Last summer, I, a 17-year-old female at the time, started working at a local hole-in-the-wall pet store in my city. They were grossly understaffed with only 7 employees. Not only that, but I was the only girl and the only employee under the age of 22. I was very naive and trusting of people at the time and constantly gave people the benefit of the doubt. After working there, my mindset changed dramatically. A lot of the customers were really predatory towards me, and I could make an entirely different post about that, but I'm going to talk about two of my coworkers, Mike and Jim. Mike was a seemingly nice, albeit a little weird guy. He was super tall and skinny and honestly could have passed as like a 20-something stoner. Jim was a retired army vet who wasn't technically an employee but volunteered there in his free time. He was also very tall, had some piercings and a shaved head. Jim and Mike were close buds and actually lived together. I'd strike up conversations with both of them when work was slow, and I wasn't intimidated by them at all. The first red flag, though. My first day of working there, I was taking out the trash and had to open the garage at the back of the store to get to the trash bin. I asked Mike for help, since I wasn't strong enough to lift it. He said, "It's not that you're not strong, you're just small. You wear it well, though." And looked me up and down. Weird, but I thought he was just trying to be nice. My third day working, Mike and I were the only ones closing the store. We were making small talk. He told me he was 32 and that he had 3 kids with 3 different women. He then proceeded to tell me in vivid detail how each of those kids were conceived, like super personal stuff you wouldn't want to be telling a coworker, much less someone you knew for 3 days. Again, weird, but he was a weird dude, and I thought maybe he was bad at picking up social cues or something. Mike would also walk me to my car a lot after work. We were usually the only ones closing, and it was always dark. At first, I thought it was a really kind thing to do. We would talk for a little bit, and I'd get in and drive off. But he would talk to me for longer periods of time each day. He would walk out and sit on the curb near my car, lighting a cigarette and inviting me to join him. I'd politely decline because I didn't want him to know that I smoked and I was worried about my reputation there. Kind of funny looking back. And one day he actually put his hand on my car door after I opened it, holding it open so I couldn't shut it. I made some excuse that I had to leave and he let go. I thought it was just an accident and that he didn't even realize that he was holding it open. I was constantly making excuses for him. A couple of days later, I heard Mike talking to a customer. I have no idea what the context was, but I heard Mike say, "If an underage girl and a guy are together, the girl should be charged with something. When I went to court, they couldn't arrest me because this girl was blackmailing me." I seriously can't make this stuff up. I met Jim after working there about a week and a half, and he had a super dry and sarcastic sense of humor, and I honestly used that as an excuse a lot of the things that he said to me. When he found out that I was 17, I'm assuming Mike told him, he would always make fun of me, say things like, "Isn't it past your bedtime?" But whatever, I thought it was kind of funny. I call him an old man even though he was only 35, and we joke around. One day I forgot to do one of my pre-closing duties, but Jim told me he would take care of it. I was super apologetic about it, and he put his hand on my arm and said, "At least you're good to look at." I just laughed it off, and he would constantly make comments about my appearance after that, telling me my shirt was too tight or that I looked a lot older than I should. It started getting more serious. One time I signed my name for the pre-closing checklist, and Jim picked it up. He was like, "Hey, sweetie, I know your last name. I could totally stalk you if I wanted to." Another coworker heard him and was like, "Dude, at least wait until she's 18. Jim turned and asked me, "Well, how long till you turn 18? I told him around 2 months, and he was like, "Nah, I can't wait that long." The next day, Jim came in. He looked at me and asked me if I drove a green car. I said yes. He then recited my license plate back to me and said, "I told you I was going to stalk you." This definitely made alarm bells go off in my head, but I desperately wanted to believe that he was kidding. Even typing this out really gives me chills. After this incident, there were multiple times that I was followed after leaving work by a white car. Luckily, my work was in the downtown area of my city, and I lived very far west, so most of the time I lost the car before I got close to my home. Though one time, the car did follow me all the way out to my neighborhood. Instead of entering my neighborhood, I just kept driving and ended up in the countryside outside of my city. I am very familiar with this area and was able to lose the car out there. It honestly was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I have no proof that this was Jim since he never closed the store and I didn't know what car he drove. It only happened while I was leaving work and it stopped after I quit. Unrelated, I put in my 2 weeks after about a month of working there. Once Mike and Jim found out I was leaving, they'd tell me how much they'd miss me and kept inviting me over to their house for coworker game night, where they'd had everyone over to play board games and drink. I reminded them that I was 17 and couldn't drink, and they told me that they didn't care and that I'd probably drink anyway. Mike constantly asked for my phone number to set up a time for a game night, but I always ended up getting distracted with something else before I could. My last day working there, I was closing with Mike, and he was like, "I bet your boyfriend's happy that you don't have to work with me and Jim anymore." Like an idiot, I told him I didn't have one. I asked him why, and he just said, "Well, me and Jim are kind of creeps, but we take pride in being creepy. It's like running a competition between us." The rest of closing, he was all over me, touching me, walking right up to me and essentially putting his body against me. At one point, I was leaning against the counter and he put his hands on either side of me and was towering over me, trapping me there. He said, "We're never going to have another girl working here like you." I left quickly after that. I was driving home. I finally added up their behavior and comments and connected all the dots in my naive mind at the time, and I couldn't believe I was so oblivious. I genuinely think that if I kept working there, something a lot worse could have happened to me. The beginning of my junior year in college, I moved into a new house with a really awesome girl named Jess. One day after classes, my friend Meg and I were on the front porch smoking when this guy walked by. He then went up to my driveway, which we shared by the house right next door where we lived. He said hi and asked if I knew Jess. Jess had lived there before I did for a year, so apparently he knew her. I said yeah, she's my roommate, and we made small talk for a second. I asked if he wanted a hit. He took one and then carried on. After Meg had left, I was still on the porch just finishing up some classwork when that neighbor came out of his house again and said hi. He walked over to my porch and came up to the stairs. I didn't think too much about it because he was really chill earlier. He went on to ask me some relationship advice, but all kinds of weird stuff like, "There's this girl I'm talking to, but she's also sending me nudes and hooking up with another guy. Why won't she do that stuff for me?" I tried in the nicest way to explain that maybe she's not into him. He then asked if I would hook up with someone right after meeting them and if I found him attractive. I definitely didn't want to hook up, and I didn't find him attractive, but I said that also in the nicest way possible. He kept calling me beautiful and one of the most beautiful girls that he ever met. The conversation got really awkward, so I excused myself inside and said I'd see him later. Later that night, I had just gotten back from hanging out with a friend. She dropped me off, and as she drove away, I was opening my door. My neighbor came swiftly out of his door, almost like he was waiting for me. He ran over to my house and posted himself up against my house and asked me if I wanted to hang out. I declined, saying I still had classwork I needed to finish before bed. He was eager. "Well, we can do work together, then maybe cuddle." I declined again and again. He eventually gave up and was asking me more intimate questions, but about my preferences and if I would hook up with him. I kept deflecting and trying to leave. He eventually asked for a hug, which I also declined, and he didn't give up on that one. He ended up grabbing me and pulling me in tightly to his arms and squeezing me, which left me feel so sick to my stomach. I quickly pulled away as fast as I could, ran into my house, and locked the door. Some time goes by, and I'm cooking in my kitchen when I hear a knock at my front door. None of my friends were coming over, so I was clueless as to who it was. I peeked around the corner and saw my neighbor, and my stomach sank a little. Instead of answering the door, I just snuck myself into the bathroom and hid for a second, hoping he'd think I'd fallen asleep. Another 3 knocks came, and then another. Finally, silence. Then all of a sudden, he calls out my name through the open window next to my door. "Amy? Hello? Amy, I know you're home. I just have a few questions to ask. Amy?" At this point, I was sick. I texted my friend Corey, who lived in the fraternity house just right down the street from me, to quickly run over here and act like he was there to hang out. Corey came and met the neighbor at my doorstep. I overheard the neighbor's conversation, which consisted of, "Are you her boyfriend? She told me she was doing homework tonight, but now she's having friends over? Do you think she might like me? Can you tell me more about her?" Corey did an awesome job at deflecting, and I opened the door to get him inside as fast as I could. The neighbor asked me to come outside real quick. I did, only because I felt safer with Corey just behind the door. He ended up asking almost the same questions from before and ended the conversation with, "Can I have a hug?" I said, "I'll see you later," and ran into the house. The next day, Jess returned from her boyfriend's and I told her all about our neighbor. She surprisingly knew all about him and his ways. He had pretty much waited outside for her numerous times like he did for me, watched her run up and down the street and try to hang out and hug and touch her as well. Jess eventually told her boyfriend about my encounters with our neighbor and went over to have a word with him. I'm not sure what he said, but the neighbor never made eye contact with me again. I'm afraid that if I didn't speak up and tell Jess, things could have quickly gotten worse. I know lots of people had far worse stories than me, but this always sends a chill up my spine, thinking about it. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, farts are always funny.